In example 3, we're going to be dealing with a horizontal shift, and that makes things a little bit more difficult. There are a couple different ways to do example 3, so I am going to show you two different things. First, let's take a look. Every time you want to start, let's find that midline. So we're going from 1 down to -1. So the midline is going to be at 0. So let's put that in first. And if the midline is at 0, we know that D is equal to 0. So we are not shifting up or down. And next what we need to do is we need to find one full period. So we need to figure out what function we're using. And that's where things can be slightly different. This is actually a problem, and all of them are problems where you could either do sine or cosine, but everything else would be different. So if we take a look, we're not really starting right here. Okay, we either have to start at the midline, which would be a sine function, or we have to start directly above or below the midline, like something here. So if we take starting right here, going in the positive direction, this would be where we begin, just to give you an idea. In one full rotation, we would come from here. So this is a cosine graph. We're going to come up here, around, and remember our cosine ends here. So this would be the end. This would be one full period of a cosine graph. So what we would be looking at here first, if we name our function, this would be a cosine function. Okay, if we think about our amplitude for this function, our amplitude is just 1, which we talked about. Here's our midline. From the midline up or the midline down, it's a distance of 1. And it is a reflection. So instead of starting at our midline and going up, we went down first. So we know that A is equal to -1. Then we need to find C. So we're looking for how we've shifted from 0, which means we need to start labeling our other tick marks on this graph. If you take a look at how our graph is split up in the very beginning, we have 1, 2, 3 tick marks, 2 that are unmarked, but 2/3, so 2 out of the 3, we're taking of pi over 6. So to find C, we're taking 2/3 of pi over 6, which means we're taking 2/3 times pi over 6, which is going to give us pi over 9. So this point right here, this tick mark right here, is pi over 9. So we have gone from 0 to here, which is a distance of pi over 9. So we know that our C value is pi over 9. That's how much we've shifted our graph from the beginning, which would have started here. We moved it to the right by pi over 9. Then we need to figure out the period so that we can find the B value. So this is one full period from here to here. So we need to look and see. We are going from pi over 9 to this point right here. We have to figure out what that point is going to be. So we can count. Every 2 is a pi over 9. If every 2 is a pi over 9, let's start counting up. So this one, so here's pi over 9, another 2. This right here would be 2 pi over 9. Pi over 3 would be the same as 3 pi over 9, which is true. 4 pi over 9. We go over 2 more. 5 pi over 9. 2 more. 6 pi over 9, which is the same as 2 pi over 3. And then we get to 7 pi over 9. So this point right here is 7 pi over 9. So we are going from pi over 9 to 7 pi over 9. So to figure out what the period is, we're going to subtract 7 pi over 9 minus pi over 9, which is going to give us 6 pi over 9, which is the same thing as 2 pi over 3. And now we're ready to write our equation. So we can write our graph. Our answer would be y equals negative cosine of 3 times x minus pi over 9. And there's no shift up or down. And then what we're doing is we're going to multiply the 3 throughout. So we get y equals negative cosine of 3x minus pi over 3. Now, like I was saying before, there's another way that you can do this problem, so you don't have to look at it as a cosine graph. So I'm going to briefly show you what that would look like if we decided to do the sine graph. So I am going to go ahead and delete what we have here. Oops, wrong one. Okay, now that it's deleted, let's take a look again at what we're looking at. So we did our midline, and that's going to be the same. Our midline was at 0. And before we chose to go from here to here and make it a cosine graph. But if we wanted to find the sine graph, we could find where it's starting at our midline. Remember, sine starts at the midline. So we could go from here, and then if we follow one sine all the way around, so sine goes from here, it goes up, and it comes back down again, so to here would be where we would stop. And now we're dealing with a sine graph. So we would say our function for number 1 would be the sine. If we look at our amplitude's still the same. We're still 1 away, and it's still a reflection. So A is going to be negative 1. Then if we take a look at marking everything, the markings are still going to be the same as well. Remember that the second one was pi over 9, but now instead of taking 2/3 of pi over 6, we are only taking 1/3 of pi over 6. Because we want to know 1 tick mark away what that distance would be. So 1/3 of pi over 6 is the same as taking 1/3 times pi over 6, which is pi over 18. Which means our C value, our C value is going to be pi over 18, but remember we're going in the negative direction, so it's going to be negative pi over 18. Oops. Okay, and then we're going to take a look at the period. So step 4, we're going to do the period. Now the period is going to go from negative pi over 18, and then we have to figure out what this one is. So we're counting by pi over 18s. So our period's going from negative pi over 18, and then if we count, so negative pi over 18, this would be 1 pi over 18, 2 pi over 18, 3 pi over 18, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pi over 18. So we're going from negative pi over 18 to 11 pi over 18, which is a distance of 12 pi over 18, which simplifies down to 2 pi over 3. Then we can go ahead and find b from there. So 2 pi over b is going to be equal to 2 pi over 3. If we multiply both sides by b, we get 2 pi equal to 2 pi over 3 times b. And then multiplying by that reciprocal, we get our b value to be 3. And from here, we can go ahead and write our equation. So if we plug it in, we get y equals negative sine of 3 times x plus pi over 18. Close that. And then if we distribute the 3, we get y is equal to negative sine of 3x plus pi over 6. So again, both answers would be correct, the cosine one or the sine one. So in some of these, you might have different answers. If you have questions, let me know.